strategic commodity of West Asia, that is water.
After the desalination plant was targeted there,
for the Gulf countries, because they need water, the desalination plants for their water much more than Iran does.
A service building at the power and water desalination plant was attacked as part of the Iranian aggression.
Every headline about the Iran war right now is about the same thing: oil, tanker traffic, blockades, Brent crude spiking past $80 a barrel, dragging fuel and shipping costs up worldwide. And all of that coverage is accurate. Oil markets really have been rattled, and that ripple genuinely reaches gas pumps thousands of miles from this conflict. But all of that coverage is also missing the story that actually keeps regional security analysts up at night. Because oil isn't the resource that could bring the Gulf to its knees in a matter of days. Water is. And unlike oil, where the world has strategic reserves, alternate suppliers, and weeks of buffer even during a genuine supply shock, when a Gulf nation runs out of water, there's no equivalent fallback. There's just a countdown. Here's the uncomfortable truth about the Arabian Peninsula. By any natural measure, cities like Dubai, Doha, and Manama shouldn't be able to support the populations they do. There's almost no groundwater, negligible rainfall, and no rivers to speak of. Every one of these metropolises exists because of a single piece of industrial technology: desalination. The dependency numbers are staggering once you actually line them up. Kuwait, 90% from desalination. Oman, 86%. Saudi Arabia, despite some groundwater reserves, still roughly 70%. Qatar and Bahrain, effectively total dependence, as close to 100% as a country can get. And it isn't spread across a resilient, redundant network. According to a CSIS analysis of the region, more than 90% of all the Gulf's desalinated water comes from just 56 plants, 56 facilities, standing between tens of millions of people and their entire water supply. Read that number again, because it's about to matter a lot more than it sounds. Here's what makes this more than an academic worry. Since the war on Iran began this February, desalination infrastructure has already been hit, repeatedly on both sides. In the war's opening days, the Fujairah Power and Water Complex in the UAE and Kuwait's Doha West Station both suffered damage from missile debris and intercepted drone fragments. By March, the strikes turned more direct. Iran accused the U.S. of hitting a desalination plant on Qashm Island, cutting water to roughly 30 villages, a claim accompanied by a pointed warning from Iran's foreign minister. The United States, he said, had set this precedent, not Iran. A day later, Bahrain reported an Iranian drone had struck one of its own desalination centers. The pattern has only intensified since. In a single strike this month, Iranian attacks damaged a Kuwaiti power and desalination facility badly enough to spark a fire and knock out a significant share of its generation capacity. Bahrain's water infrastructure has been hit again, and regional reporting now describes a shift from occasional, possibly incidental damage to what one analysis called sustained multi-night targeting of civilian infrastructure, arriving in direct response to American strikes on Iran's own power grid. This isn't limited to water systems either. It's part of a much broader pattern of Gulf states absorbing the fallout of a war they didn't start. In one recent weekend alone, Iranian strikes hit fuel tanks at Kuwait's international airport and a Bahraini desalination plant simultaneously, while a stray projectile killed civilians in a residential area south of Riyadh. Regional casualty tallies compiled by AFP now put the death toll across Gulf states, countries not even formally party to the US-Iran war, at close to 20 people, most of them civilians. That's the real cost of a war being fought partly on someone else's territory. This is the core, dangerous mechanic of this entire conflict. Hit Iran's electrical grid, and you disable the pumps and filtration systems Iran needs for its own water processing. Iran has signaled clearly it sees the reverse as fair game. Worth noting, Iran itself isn't immune to this same vulnerability, just far less exposed. Desalinated water makes up only about 3% of Iran's domestic supply, meaning Iran has comparatively little to lose and much less to fear from a tit-for-tat water infrastructure exchange than any of its Gulf neighbors, an asymmetry that should worry Gulf capitals more than it currently seems to. Here's where this stops being a policy paper and starts being a countdown. If this escalates from damage to deliberate, sustained destruction, how long would these countries actually last? The honest answer, not long. And it varies more than you'd think. Bahrain, about 4 days. Kuwait, somewhere between 10 and 15 days. Qatar's own numbers don't even agree with each other. One official estimate says 7 to 10 days. Another government statement from earlier this year claimed 4 months. That's not a typo, and that's not us being sloppy with the research. That's two arms of the same government giving wildly different answers to the most important question they could be asked right now, which tells you something on its own about how seriously this has actually been war-gamed. The UAE is the one country that looks like it's actually thought this through. Under its 2036 water security strategy, it's built tiered reserves. 2 days at normal consumption, 16 days under emergency rationing, and up to 45 days if things get severe enough to ration hard. That's not luck. That's the one government in the region that treated this as a real contingency instead of a hypothetical. So 4 days, 10 days, 45 if you're lucky and prepared, those are the numbers. Now, here's the part that should worry you more than any of them. These facilities are almost impossible to defend. Desalination plants are large, fixed, open-air industrial sites, not hardened bunkers. They work as linear systems. Intake, high-pressure pumping, membrane filtration, distribution, one stage after another. And here's the problem with a linear system. You don't need to destroy the whole thing. Damage any single stage, one pump, one membrane building, one section of intake pipe, and the entire plant can go dark for weeks. You don't even need a direct hit. Falling debris from an intercepted drone can do nearly as much damage as a missile that gets through clean. And geography isn't on their side either. The majority of the Gulf's most critical plants sit within roughly 350 kilometers of the Iranian coastline, easily inside range of Iran's missile and drone inventory. Air defense systems, however sophisticated, have already proven unable to guarantee full coverage over military targets in this conflict. Fixed civilian infrastructure sitting in the open is a considerably softer target. There's also a resilience problem that has nothing to do with weapons at all. Desalination is extraordinarily energy-intensive. These plants don't just need to survive a strike. They need a constant, uninterrupted power supply to function at all. Damage a regional power station miles away from the coast, and you can knock out water production just as effectively as hitting the plant directly. That means the actual list of vulnerable targets is much longer than 56 physical facilities. It includes every power plant, substation, and transmission line those facilities depend on, a web far too large for any single air defense network to fully protect. So let's actually do the math nobody wants to do. Stick with us for the next few minutes, because this is where the abstract numbers turn into something you can actually picture. First, a promise. Nobody, not Iran, not Western intelligence, not regional governments, is currently forecasting a total, deliberate destruction of Gulf desalination capacity. What follows is a transparent worst-case exercise, not a prediction. We're showing our work so you can judge it yourself, not so we can scare you. If a sustained campaign did succeed in disabling the majority of the Gulf's 56 critical plants, tens of millions of people across Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Oman, and Bahrain would face life-threatening water shortages within the shortest reserve windows we just covered. As little as 4 days in Bahrain's case. Break it down by city, and the scale gets more concrete. Greater Dubai alone is home to roughly 3.6 million people, almost entirely dependent on a handful of coastal desalination complexes. Doha's metro population sits around 2.4 million. Manama and its surrounding urban area house close to 700,000, in a country with, by its own government's admission, only about 4 days of buffer. Add in Riyadh, Jeddah, Kuwait City, and Muscat, and you're looking at a combined urban population well past 25 million people, whose water access traces back to a small number of shared exposed facilities. What would evacuating even a fraction of that population actually require? History gives us a sense of scale, and it's humbling. Operation Frequent Wind, the 1975 evacuation of Saigon, moved roughly 7,000 people by helicopter in about 24 hours. widely remembered as a logistical triumph at the time. Hurricane Katrina's evacuation, one of the largest peacetime domestic evacuations in U.S. history, moved an estimated 1.2 million people out of the Gulf Coast region, but over the course of days with advance warning, not under active bombardment. Rwanda's 1994 refugee crisis saw as many as 2 million people cross into neighboring countries within a matter of days, but as a chaotic, uncontrolled flight, not an organized evacuation. None of these historical events, even combined, approach the scale a genuine multi-country Gulf water crisis would demand. And remember, we're talking about a region with over 25 million people in its major cities alone, not counting smaller towns and rural communities equally dependent on the same infrastructure. Every one of the historical comparisons above happened without the added complication of an active war zone, contested airspace, and a naval blockade sitting across the primary evacuation corridor. To be honest with you, again, the far more likely path here is exactly what we've seen so far. Damage, disruption, retaliatory strikes that stop well short of total, deliberate destruction. Iran has strong incentives not to cross this line. An attack that knowingly killed tens of millions of civilians through thirst would end any remaining international legitimacy Iran has permanently, regardless of the war's outcome. Every strike so far, however alarming, has been targeted, limited, or plausibly attributed to debris and interception rather than intentional mass civilian harm. But understanding the worst case matters precisely because it clarifies what to actually watch for. If strikes on Gulf desalination infrastructure shift from occasional and incidental to sustained and deliberate, which is closer to the description of this month's activity than anyone would like, that's the signal that this conflict has crossed into genuinely uncharted territory. Right now, the strikes we've seen, even the deliberate ones, have stayed narrow in scope. A single facility, a single night, damage rather than annihilation. The moment that pattern broadens, multiple plants targeted in the same wave, power grids taken down region-wide rather than city by city, is the moment this stops being a regional escalation and becomes something the entire world has to respond to immediately, not eventually. 56 plants, 4 days of reserves in the worst-positioned country, a region of tens of millions of people whose entire existence depends on machinery sitting exposed on an active war's coastline. This isn't the headline most people are watching right now, but it might be the one that matters most. If you want to understand where this conflict could go next, subscribe, because the story of this war was never just about oil.